Welcome to another episode of the ChrisRodMaxShow. Every week we cover the most important events and companies in the AI space. And I'm joined as every week by my co-host, Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hello, everyone.
And Max. Hi, Max.
Hello, hello.
Today's episode, we have a deep dive. We're going to discuss about MidJourney. MidJourney, for those who do not know, it is a company in the image generation space. What's the story behind? Why is it relevant? Why should we care? We'll cover all that. But before we get started, Chris, Max, have you used MidJourney before? Do you play with it?
No, I'm not. I think there are so many other companies now. I mean, honestly speaking, at this point, you can also just use ChatGPT for any image generation. I think the struggle all services have is sort of like finding the right prompt, right? Especially with images, it gets a little bit into a black box what you get out. I think there are these like shortcuts, like, you know, you give a little bit of formatting, etc., behind the prompt. But honestly speaking, I haven't really used it much.
And that's exactly what we're also discussing, how, for example, you say we can use ChatGPT, but actually the results between MidJourney and something like ChatGPT DALL are crazily different. It's like staggering how different it is. But what about you, Max? Are you a MidJourney user? Or...
So I'm not a MidJourney user, clearly not creative enough. But I have tried, I would say, apps that are built on Stable Diffusion, right? So I think those free credits allow me to use it. And then I believe MidJourney is not free. That's probably why I haven't been able to try out as much. I've just done everything within ChatGPT so far. And I don't do a lot of image rendering.
And here you also introduce another important keyword, Stable Diffusion. That is the technology powering pretty much all of these image generator models and apps and startups. We'll also talk a little bit about that. But okay, we established that here. So two of us do not use MidJourney at all. I have to say that I used to use MidJourney back in 2022 when it came out, but somehow I never really got into it fully, in that this is kind of like a community. What I find fascinating about MidJourney, it is that you can see what others are generating. You can see their prompts and the results. And then from that, people build all type of like hashes and combinations and mashups. And there is some sort of like a collaborative development that's happening there. But I was never really into that. And also these prompts compared to the prompts, for example, so ChatGPT, they're very different. So I was never really into that, although I've been using MidJourney so on and off somehow. But for those who do not know, so what is here MidJourney? MidJourney is a startup completely bootstrapped. They do not have a single dollar of venture capital. They are generating around estimated $500 million per year just from these image generations. And what is fascinating, it is for a very long time, they didn't even have their own like app or platform. It was just a Discord bot. So you go to discord.com in MidJourney and you could just type /imagine and your prompt. Imagine a dragon. So Donald Trump riding a dragon and so on, and you'll get the result. And that made possible, that became really viral. So it's like, this is fascinating. And this sort of like underscores how it is that we might not need venture capital at all if we want to be successful. So thinking about that, so here, Chris, when you want to generate images, I imagine that you want also to get different results, right? How would my living room look with this lamp? How would they look with a red sofa and so on? How do you go about that, Chris? You just say there's ChatGPT and that's it, and I make the best of it, or maybe you shop around, or?
I honestly don't ask. I'm not making a remake of my living room, so I don't think I needed to have AI to like tell me how. I don't know. I feel like a lot of these features are already baked in. I guess IKEA would be able to do exactly that, what you were just describing. I used MidJourney before, but again, I think the problem in general is like it comes with a black box, and maybe the quality might be better on MidJourney, I don't know, versus ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is good enough, right? And also, if you really want to be fancy, you can use ChatGPT Sora, which is, again, is an image generator. And I think for I would say 80% of use cases you have in your business life is probably okay. It's enough. And I think yeah, companies like, I don't know, the Procter & Gambles of the world are definitely using it for copy, for images generation. I think Where it becomes more interesting is if you can actually tell an entire story consistently with characters. Like just imagine you want to build a like a comic book or like a kid's book with illustration, and you have this like protagonist teddy bear, whatever, doing all its adventures. The question is, can you actually replicate that same teddy bear over different frames of images? And I don't know, and I don't think it is at least possible in MidJourney. I'm sure there are services out there that tries to like keep the different figures constant, but I think that is really where it gets more interesting. And if you want to think about it even further, I think it's then about motion, right? It's about video generation. And I think if I look at that space, you have VO3, that's the latest technology out there, but you can only generate 8-second videos. So I think that's really the current state of art, I would say. And still, I think it's too early to say, or it's probably just wait another 6 months, and I'm sure those things that I just described will be on the market.
And also, Max, you were making a point on, however, it used to be free. Now they have restricted over time because, of course, it becomes more expensive to maintain, and also they do not need this. When it started, you will get a certain number of credits per day, and you could generate that, and then it will restart the next day and so on. So I remember, back when it came out, it was something where you would use your credits every day and then wait until the next day to continue. Even though you say, Chris, that so there is here different offerings from OpenAI for ChatGPT and image generators within ChatGPT, not only DALL but others. Right now, the market share of MidJourney is higher than those coming from OpenAI. So MidJourney commands around 1/3 of the image generator market. Here, so Max, thinking here from your like investor lens perspective, when you look at MidJourney, because you say that you've used it, but not really and so on, so it has been like maybe like a light touch experience and so on. And then you see, hey, this is a company that has 1/3 of the market and has not raised a single dollar in venture money. Do you go and try to contact the founder and say, hey, I'll give you like a 1 billion best terms and so on? Or you think he rather this company will never raise money and there's no point? How do you go about this type of cases with companies where clearly they have not had a need for venture capital? Does that make it even more exciting for you because you can be the first one, or you think pointless?
The best time to raise money is when you don't need money, right? So if they really want to raise, I'm sure I'm not the only one that would throw money at them. All the largest VC would have thrown money at them. So from a venture case, sure, absolutely. From a realistic perspective, I think there's a reason why he wanted it to be that way, right? Given his prior experience as a founder, I think if you look at successful entrepreneurs, right? Not just in tech, successful entrepreneurs over many, many years, the Rockefellers, anyone you can think of, the big ones, right? Most of them optimize for control. Even Giorgio Armani that recently died, he controls the entire company. Everything is in his direction. He hasn't taken extra capital from the outside. Nobody actually bought any shares of Armani. And I felt like some of the generational founders, especially those who truly go and hit it out of the park, they somehow need to have control of the company and being able to steer towards whatever they think is the right way to go. The last thing you need is, the same Uber episode that happens when you're really trying to change. And then you have, some investors just going against what you're trying to do when you're really within a company, the founder will probably know the company the best. If you ask me as a user, I think it's probably for the better, just provide people the view that you could do this in an alternative way. But then if you're an investor really trying to chase after opportunity, then you just need to figure out how to compete with such a business. Just to come back on the user / make a name for themselves, they were just making it for free, so everyone tried to use it. I think distinctly I generated some sort of like panda stuff just for fun. What will be super interesting is that, out of the 20-something% market share that they have, what are people using the models for, right? Like, are they just generating it for storytelling? Are they using it for, I don't know, like home extension rendering, which is, the example that you gave? Actually, if you want to look at, let's say in the UK, if you go to like Zoopla as a website to look at housing, there is an extra tab that tells you if you were to extend your house in an X amount of way, this is the X amount cost. And the stuff there are probably rendered by AI. So I find those, I guess, extra use cases that built on top of it super interesting, which also aligns with what the founder wanted to do, giving it's a machine to improve human creativity rather than a creativity machine itself. The long-winded answer is, as an investor, not so much, right? You would want to go, but as a user, probably good to have an alternative to what the world believes.
And there you make a very good point, Max, about control. So where the founder, so David Holz, is not a first-time founder. So before he did a company called Leap Motion back in 2011. And this company raised close to $100 million. At the end, it was sold for just a fraction, around 30 million. But I'm sure that the person, David, he had many opportunities for secondaries and so on. So you could assume that he was pretty much, let's say, like set for life. And therefore now with something like MidJourney, it's pretty much like go big or go home, and there's nothing to lose. And from a risk-taking perspective, so Chris, you've been a founder and you've been also involved in many entrepreneurial projects and so on. Do you feel that over time you become more like a risk taker? Do you become more like risk averse? If you have here already some funds in the bank, do you say now that's the time so to really go something bold, or the opposite?
I don't think this is maybe the right question to ask, right? Because I don't think it's financials obviously matter, but I think it's also do you have an idea in your mind, and are you in a life situation that you are able and capable of tolerating more stress, more uncertainty, and more pain, frankly speaking, right? And that's really what drives the combination is basically what drives everything. And sometimes there's also a huge portion of luck or serendipity, right? Like maybe even while you're doing your full-time job, you get an idea, or you have this random meeting with a high school friend of yours that you hadn't seen for 10 years. I think that's really what drives that decision making much more so. What about yourself?
I think that exactly this idea that the more economic security I have, the more bolder things I want to do, because I think, hey, what's there to lose? Whereas, so when it was things less certain, then I would have to think, okay, if it fails, then where do I stand and so on. And of course, many things do not work, and yeah, most of the things end up being a complete loss. But then for myself, I do think that more and more I think, hey, in the end, we only have one life. Our time is limited on this planet. And then what is it that we could be doing that has the largest impact? So you, Max, are you here becoming more cautious over time, or you say, hey, go big or go home?
I guess it really depends. I guess you think of it as a poker theory, right? It depends on how much chips you have on your hand. So what sort of risks are you taking truly? And what sort of reward are you trying to reap from it? And I think different people think of risk and reward differently. It depends on what you value more. Whether or not are the chips a hand, or do you value more of whatever the rewards are. And I almost felt that if you don't have a lot, it's always good to swing for the fences, simply because the losses are relatively little. What's the worst that happened? You come back to where you are. But then if I think I heard this right from some of the generational wealth family. They're like, oh, why we have so much cash, we might as well just sit on it, wait for the world to go a little bit bonkers, and then you go in and buy, because they can just wait. So it really depends on a person's situation. Personally, I feel like I am not rich, so I will always swing for the fences one way or the other.
Indeed, exactly that, right? But then even once you have swung for the fences, then you say, hey, now I can even do like a bolder take and so on, right? So what's the problem? Worst case, I already have some assets, I already have some caution. And also here what's fascinating is, Chris, you were saying earlier that, well, there is ChatGPT. And in fact, yes, ChatGPT, and specifically DALL, so the image generator model from OpenAI, was already around when MidJourney came out in 2022. It was not something where MidJourney was the first one. It was not something where there was nothing like that out there. But I'd say that here comes again the question and the relevant aspect of distribution, meaning The problem with DALL and OpenAI was that back then you were not able to use ChatGPT to generate your image. You had to do this through the API. You had to use basically a code for that. So therefore it was a bit obscure. It was only for developers. And MidJourney was integrated in Discord, and Discord has a massive community. So you're a gamer as well, Max, right? I imagine that you also use Discord, so every once and then.
Yes, I do, especially in the crypto times. You use Discord, that's where everybody talk about, right? But what I find really interesting with the usage of Discord is I suspect he was trying to obviously build a community back then. When it first came out, and crypto was huge, and crypto is still huge. It's just a lot of people are on Discord waiting for some sort of airdrops. But on the Discord point, what I find interesting is that he is so focused on building what is needed and trying to just make it available via different channels. I could think of MidJourney exposing itself via WhatsApp, right? So just like what you would do on Discord, you /imagine something. Can you do the same on WhatsApp? When I was talking, let's say, when I'm about to text both of you, and then I just randomly want to generate something that represents my thoughts. Is that possible via WhatsApp, right? So that is where the distribution channel, where everyone's, I would say, a focus on usage would be. But then for MidJourney themselves, they just want to be the best machine for any sort of creative rendering, the most lifelike, or the most, I guess, most color variant models. So I actually find that could actually be a result of why he refused to take venture capital money, right? Because if you think about venture capital, person would be, oh, you own your distribution. If you don't own your distribution, you're almost die. So there is a possibility this is actually why he decided being in control is more important and focus on what truly makes them different and what his goals are, which is to build the machine for creativity. So I don't know, just a thought, right? Like I kind of just link the different, I would say, behavior and outcome that we're seeing with how he runs his company. I do not know him personally, but at least that's my hypothesis.
You were making that a great point, Max, with the Discord being, especially back then, late 2021, 2022, that hotspot for crypto activities. So NFTs, new drops and so on. So it was really buzzing. I remember back then I was trying to do some sort of like startup in the Web3 space, and I was looking at how to make use of Discord. And even today, Discord has around 200 million active users every month. So here you see how one can basically piggyback on that massive community and then have that from day one for something that was not available anywhere else in Discord and really anywhere else on the internet. Yes, you could use DALL from OpenAI, but it meant you need to know how to code. And here, from the same chat prompt from Discord, you could start generating images. And here for you, Chris, where do you stand in this distribution debate between, let's say, own your own distribution channel versus piggybacking someone else's community? What do you suggest, or what do you feel makes the most sense, or what you've done previously? MidJourney was using Discord and immediate access to 200 million people. The alternative could be to say, hey, let's create midjourney.com, and then let us have their website, and then we control their everything. So very often we have the choice between, let's say, for example, do like a Slack chatbot, or we can do like a WhatsApp chatbot or something, and then make use of an existing community, or we can just go and create our own moat, so to say.
But I think the purpose was a different one, right? Using Discord at the beginning when they came out was for beta testing, right? They were able to access a community of very early adopters, people who are tech savvy and could try out, and it was a good community to improve the prompting, improve the image generator. That is the purpose. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not like they were tapping into there was no monetization, right? Like during the time where it was free on Discord, you could generate an image and it was all public and people could see what you were generating and how you prompted it. And I think that was also in part for educational purposes. So I think from that angle, it makes a lot of sense. Now, is that a mode? Not really, right? Like, it's kind of like going into this whole open source vibe, if you will. And I think to really build a mode is when you think about business models and thinking about how you actually monetize it. And I think for that, maybe Discord is not really the best. But I don't think this was ever the purpose, to be honest.
There you're very right. So and perhaps now has changed a little bit, but really, so MidJourney, it was as you're describing. It is primarily a research lab, so from AI researchers who want to create image generator models. And then they say, hey, we need access to data. We need a way how we can get prompts and activity. And also, ideally, we need a way how to pay the bills for our own fun and everything that we're doing. And then like the byproduct was exactly describing. So here, Discord. And then because it is easier to just use so Discord as a platform instead of building a whole chatbot and the whole thing for like MidJourney, then that's how they started. And somehow it became highly successful, not only as a product, but also as a company financially. So right now, look at some numbers, some statistics, they have around 163 employees and they do around 3 million revenue per employee. And now is 10 times that. It is like 500 million revenue. And so here, this is something that you really see as other companies. But then here, Chris, you were alluding to the topic of here like moat and so competitors and so on. You also look at, for example, here, so OpenAI, ChatGPT. What would you say then it can be here, this moat for this type of software for image generators? Because you do not only have so here MidJourney, but also there is by now so Flux. There are a few others, and of course you can generate images with Gemini from Google. You can generate images from like the Microsoft Assistant and so on. So it is pretty much that every chatbot assistant from a large tech company these days has its own image generator. So if you're advising MidJourney, what would you recommend as a mode?
I think Rod, just cutting off here. I haven't looked into it. I don't know. I don't know what I'm Googling on the side to find out more about MidJourney. How do they make money? I don't even know.
So now, for example, in 2024, they moved out from using Discord towards having their own platform, so MidJourney.com and so on. And in general, so here for startups that, for example, if I think in previous eras of the internet, so if I look at, so when it was possible to do with, so Facebook back then, there was a time where you could use the Facebook API and then build your own apps. And there were cases like Singa. Maybe some of you remember that you could do video games on Facebook and it was very popular. But then all of a sudden, Facebook decided otherwise. And then they started restricting access to the API and that pretty much killed Singa. And Singa was publicly traded. It was worth billions and so, and then now I guess they still exist somehow. So here, for example, here, Max, what would you say is like the right time to jump off from someone else's platform? So stop piggybacking from someone else's and then build your own. Is there like a right time?
I think that the best question to ask is actually OpenAI, because they're doing that right now, isn't it? They signed the huge distribution to get into all your enterprises via Microsoft, right? And then now they're going around that, right? Because they do GTM a little bit like what Palantir was doing, which is going in, consulting, building on AI agents that may or may not utilize Microsoft's operating system. So to answer your question, is that a right time? I think it's very context dependent in my opinion. From a distribution perspective, when you somehow, I guess, build your name for yourself, you have some sort of recognition for what you're doing, then there is an ability for you to be in those conversations. E.g., because your brand already created some sort of new, I would say, customer behavior. So it's a little bit like how everyone's saying at the moment, across all your AI apps, ChatGPT is obviously becoming the household name, right? It's almost like becoming Google of the search, right? Like nobody says Bing something, people say Google something. Nobody says Claude something, people say ChatGPT something. So you almost created like a new sort of, I would say, consumer behavior. I think that could be interesting, right? That kind of gives you an opportunity to think about how you would distribute it differently compared to riding on someone's distribution capability. I think the second thing is when you realize the economics don't quite work too. Ultimately, you want it to be somehow sustainable. So if you're always distributing via someone and they're just cutting into your margins and making it hard for you to survive, I think that will probably prompt you to start thinking. I guess one, it's almost like a luxury. The other one is more of a necessity. And yeah, I mean, you could think of multiple different ways to cut this, but I think it's quite context dependent. In this instant, I think OpenAI kind of did the magical move, right? Partner with the best distribution partner they can, and then somehow at the moment, if their GTM AI agent build works out, they can literally circumvent Microsoft, right? It's like Elon Musk tweeted, like, OpenAI is going to eat Microsoft alive. Who knows how true is that? But it's interesting. It's an interesting thought process.
And I see how here we're already crystallizing some learnings, right? So first, control, extremely important. If you can keep as much control, then do that. If you don't need to raise money, don't raise money. Often we celebrate, so you have this startup culture that say, oh, here, $50 million round, and then people are so happy, and it's like it's Christmas and so on, when in fact, it's not that good, right? It means that you are diluting control, that ultimately you're no longer in charge of your own organization. Then the second one is if you can also try to go as large as possible, be as bold as you can, because then these bets can really pay off if they go well. But then now also here, Max, what you're mentioning is that there is necessarily not a right time when to like switch from a platform, from an incumbent to your own, but you have to do it at some point, right? You cannot like become here dependent permanently from a third party, because ultimately you're saying here with Microsoft, so OpenAI was at risk of being engulfed by Microsoft, right? So there was here rumors that they would like completely take over. So OpenAI, that Microsoft was becoming a much more ruthless and hard negotiator on the terms. So for OpenAI, but at the same time, what we have also now with MidJourney is that yes, they're moving out from Discord and their own platform. Last year they did that, but now this year they announced a partnership with Meta. So here the company behind Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, and so on, they so have here announced that there's a licensing deal, and MidJourney will get access to basically the Facebook user base. It seems that here Meta was realizing that their image generation is not as good as the one offered by MidJourney. So this allowed, for example, so for MidJourney to diversify, and then for Meta to basically get access to what is arguably the best technology on the market. And so here we have also to think about, so here it's a little bit like David versus Goliath, because MidJourney, yes, they're making 500 million, but that's a bucket of, it's a drop in the ocean. So compared to the revenue that Meta is generating. And also they have 160 employees and Meta has thousands. Chris, you're always so here navigating between established organizations, startups, and so on, and then throughout your career, you also experience this type of like partnerships and deals between established player and a startup. Any pointers that you have so for like here nimble organizations that decide to partner with behemoths?
Always difficult, I would say. Huh? I mean, it's always two cultures clashing. I think in the case of Meta and MidJourney, maybe they play in the same space. They I mean, Zuckerberg used to be this college dropout, right? Like he used to be on the other side of the table. Facebook is not a small company. I mean, Meta is not a small company. It's one of the giants now in the industry, and of course, with all the scrutiny that's going on from the EU, but then also from Washington, like Meta needs to adhere to bigger rules and policies, and I think that will make it very difficult to, for MidJourney to like absorb, right? For example, when a big company decides to invest into a startup, typically what happens is, okay, you get a minority share or a majority share, whichever. just the auditing and the bookkeeping alone takes quite a bit of time, probably even one FTE in addition to put into that particular startup. Typically, for example, you would need like a 5-year plan, which most early stage companies don't even have. They can't even predict the next year, or with a bit of luck they can, but that's about it, right? So there's a bit of that mismatch between business maturity, I would say, the type of standardized processes that you need to go through as a big company, that a lot of, frankly speaking, a lot of startups struggle with. Just alone, I mean, in the startup world, you would use Slack, you would use Google Drive, you would use all these very, like, let's say, web-based and cloud-based tools. And in a big company, typically you would find Microsoft, Copilot, whatnot. Yeah, all these very, like, let's say, older generation technology. And just getting that across is already really, really difficult. Or even for developers, you have Microsoft Asia that people build on, but maybe in the wild, like you would use React and you would use different types of tools and newer generation of program languages even, or you would just simply use ChatGPT, which actually in a corporate world or in a bigger company you couldn't use. So from a, let's say, cultural perspective, you have differences. From a policy standard, you have differences. From a tool landscape and what you're allowed to use, you have differences. So that makes an integration often very, very challenging. And it does take a bit of that, change management and transformation, whatever that actually means, into consideration. But most often, I think the most important component is just time.
Yes, so you're making here great points on saying, on one side, from let's say like the corporate established player, this means allocate resources. You're saying there needs to be some program managers, account manager, whatever the role it is, that's just the touch point, the contact person between the startup and here the corporate. Then all the adjustments in systems and so processes and culture that needs to happen between the two of them. But what about on the startup side? So often this is touted as a little bit like the holy grail. So we need to partner with this large organization. We need this logo. If we have Meta on our roster, this will really boost our credibility. This will massively improve our chance and so on. And yeah, maybe they do not know what they're getting into, right? Max, so you also have to help navigate these startups, right? So often you have to interact with them. So what is it? So when they come to you and so on, what is it that you want to see from them, or maybe what can you advise to them?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to working with startup, I think depends on the maturity of those startups. I think one of the big thing that I've seen, and especially with AI companies, is that the ability to show that you're able to solve the business's problem at a very short time is quite important. Right? I'm thinking probably less from a technology company perspective, but more on your traditional industry perspective, right? When you sell to, I don't know, finance, medicine, law, or your traditional large corporate, the ability to show value with the technology itself is quite important. It's okay if you have a roadmap to get to where you are, but somehow ability to prove that you're able to use the technology to solve problems would be super important. I guess the second thing would be just on the maturity itself, right? Sometimes startups runs really quickly. I would say large companies' perspective, right? Especially for traditional industry companies, right? Because traditional industry companies sometimes when they look at a new vendor slash provider, they will need like 3 years of financial statement. It's like, as a startup, they're probably 3 months old, not 3 years, and their technology, especially with AI company, right? Like they hit few hundred million ARR in a few months, in a few years. The mismatch of reality is quite real. So it's not at the fault of the startup, but really on all these larger companies, when you walk in to have a conversation, you just need to expect that is likely to happen. and then there are a lot of processes aligned to how they, I would say, work with younger companies. And some of them are just ridiculous, even for sometimes the person who's doing it. In order to get certain things across the board, you're better off getting it through than fighting the process. Because if you fight the process so much, you won't even get the project over the line to begin with. So it's just really managing expectation, I would say, when trying to work with larger companies. Not all larger companies are like that. Sometimes you get like some senior, some senior CEO decided that, oh, this is excited. Their friends brought it for them. They should look at it. It will move really quickly. So I think there are a few things in there, right? Managing expectation, understanding there are some sort of internal champion, understanding why the process are there to begin with, show quick value. So yeah, there are quite a few, I would say, art stuff that you need to do. It's not really a hard science.
Yes, and so here there are quite good things that any startup can take, right? As you're saying, Max. On one side, one is to be good at identifying who is the champion in the corporate. One is to be also good at setting expectations. One is to be here like structure, as Chris was saying. So many process, different systems to adopt. And Chris, you were basically at the interface between startups and established players for many years, right? Like helping bridge, so bring these startups into established organizations. When did you see good cases of good partnerships between the startup and so established player? What was, let's say, like this sweet spot where you say, hey, this works and maybe people can reproduce it? And the other way around, when did you notice, hey, this will never work and it will be frustrating for both sides?
Well, ideally and hopefully they will find it out in their due diligence, right? And whether they get along or not. But I think we need to distinguish between partnership and absorption or acqui-hire and these type of things. I mean, a partnership could also just be a contract that I buy your product on a long term, right? That's also a partnership, and I think there's nothing you need to worry about. It's more transactional, if you will, rather. And of course, like the more you start integrating and start to really absorb the startup, for example, or you buy the startup, that's really where the post-merger integration really happens. And I guess the most successful cases are the ones where both sides are somewhat flexible and nimble to adapt to each other. For example, you could leave the startup as is. You keep the brand, you preserve the culture, and you just it's almost like a holding type of structure where the startup would report into that, and maybe you second people from that bigger company into the startup, trying to do some of the standard processes that the bigger company needs to do. So as you were saying earlier, an accountant, a finance person to keep a record of the books, and I think that could work. And then you slowly but surely merge or get people more into the bigger company. That is something that works well, I would say. But of course, if it's more like a bit an involuntary type of overtake, then of course you have a lot of also cultural issues, and most likely and normally a lot of people will leave at this point in time, right? And the ones that will stay, you try to keep happy by giving them a large option package or whatnot. So I think there are mechanisms to counteract that.
Yes, absolutely. And here you're describing, yes, there is a little bit of like a life cycle or a journey. So very so relevant for the name journey. So from just partnership, maybe some licensing deal, all the way to slow absorption, and then maybe like some here strategic investment, and then ultimately an M&A, right? MidJourney is not that far, and who knows if that will ever happen. But meanwhile, one reason why they might be interested in partnering, having like a stronger backing from some large player, it is because they're also a bit in the hot water of their own. It's not like everything is so here perfect for them, where this year they got a relevant legal fight against major Hollywood studios, Warner Brothers, Disney, Universal. They're all suing MidJourney for basically copyright infringement. So where in MidJourney, you can just say, imagine Batman flying in Paris or something. And then you become, you get an image, someone who looks like a Batman, like Christian Bale or the other Batman actors in Paris. And that, of course, is a problem. If you browse through MidJourney, the images that people generate, the most popular ones, is pretty much Star Wars characters. Is here Darth Vader and whatnot. And of course, Disney, as the owners of the Star Wars property, they are not happy at all. So they are basically claiming up to $150,000 per infringed work. And for a company with a community such as MidJourney, where thousands of images of Star Wars are generated every day, this basically could break up their neck, right? And this brings us also to what we've had in the past with music generated by AI, also images and so on. So in the end, who is really infringing? So here, the copyright. Is it the user who is requesting an image of Darth Vader, or is it rather MidJourney for providing the platform? And not only that, but also if, for example, someone creates something that has value, let's say like Darth Vader in the style of Andy Warhol, and it's very cool, and this is sold, then ultimately, who was here the one that generated the added value? Was it the user with the prompt? Was it the model? Or was it the original source that was here Disney with Darth Vader? Here, Max, what do you think here? So where do things how things might play out? So where do you see things headed? Do you think that in the end, studios will win? Do you think this will drag for years and maybe in the end it will just fizzle out? Would you say these things get settled out of court? What is here your speculation? So here between this fight between MidJourney and these studios?
Well, I think MidJourney might create something entirely new, but it's also built on the knowledge of giants, right? So when I say knowledge of giants, there are also knowledge on, let's say, past creative work that was created. Ultimately, the underlying models for MidJourney is trained on past data as they were created by humans. And then when we get so worked up about it, and it's quite funny because if you think about all the other knowledge that we have, it's also based on past knowledge of others. If you restrict those knowledge from being accessible to others to use, whether or not intelligence or artificial intelligence, you're kind of preventing human from progressing in a way. So I think in my view, I feel like in the long term, the technology itself will be good enough that we could use it, that people felt that it's actually okay to build on, I would say, the right knowledge. We will look back at it. I think in the short term, there is a possibility for all these larger studios to block it entirely in favor of copyright law, yada, yada. But then if it actually doesn't help us to progress to build on this technology that we all think is great, does the copyright law in itself actually serve the long-term interests of human beings? I do not know. I just felt that in the short term, the larger corporates, especially when they still have a lot of power, they will be able to stop it one way or the other. But then in the longer term, if US really wanted to be, I guess, ahead of the rest of the world, I felt that it would just go away. Or it will be used and you just do not know it. It's a little bit like, how CIA, GCHQ are watching you. It's just you do not know kind of idea, right? Not trying to spur new conspiracy theory. It's just, it might happen because in a way it felt like restricting data. It's a little bit like restricting knowledge to be able to be used by individuals, right? I'm just toying with the idea that there's a possibility of an alternative.
And Chris, so you are also an artist. You're also a photographer. You have actually published work. You have your own exhibitions and so on. So one could say that, in fact, so you achieve much more success than many other aspiring artists. And when you put here your artist hat, when you look at all this, how do you feel about the image generating space? So do you feel that, for example, when people generate images that might look similar to what you do, this somehow infringing your creativity? Do you feel now that maybe what's the point in doing this? When you put these creator artist lenses, what is it that you see? What is it that you think?
I actually think this is a problem that has existed even before AI came on. You could also argue like you could steal a picture, put it on Photoshop, do 2 or 3 tweaks, and it's a new, by legal perspective, it's a new image. With AI, it just got very much accelerated. The much bigger problem is the monetization. Right? Do the artists actually get royalty from somehow the process of AI? And I think that's really the debate, right? That's why Disney and Warner Brothers and so forth are so sensitive about AI just learning on their data and like coming up with images and videos and so forth. In a previous episode, we spoke about the idea of letting AI crawl your website and your content, but for a fee. And I think that could be actually quite an interesting business model for all the artists out there. It's kind of like paying a royalty. It's like, being Spotify and paying a royalty to artists. And yes, one can debate whether or not it's still exploitatively, and maybe it is. But again, I think the core of the debate and the misalignment is the payment and the monetization, much more so than the artistic creativity here. Because as we say, right, like great artists steal and copy from other people. So in a way, it's almost like a creative pollination you anyways need. But yeah, I think the key is really who gets the big chunk of the pie of the new created value here.
Yes, and you boil it down basically as long as, for example, people get compensated and it's not just outright. So here, steal, and their art, their creative work is used for like training some AI models, then should be fine. And this pretty much like covers like all these MidJourney journeys. So where we're seeing how first you have here a highly innovative, not so much on the technology itself, because that sort of like already existed. It is rather on how it was distributed using an existing platform for an existing audience that didn't have that, and being user-friendlier than what was out there. And then keeping a very small team, having already the capacity through own funds, on resources to keep this team afloat, but basically by now have a company generating 500 million. But in this world of AI, where you have massive monsters, so generating billions, and also established players who feel pretty wary about what's happening and what's going on with their own copyright works and their own IP, then even something like MidJourney needs to find powerful friends in the AI space, for example, in this case Meta, to be prepared for these very long, so judicial and legal fights, until figuring out if what they're doing is actually correct or not. And if not, then how much should be compensated. And that pretty much covers everything so for today's week's show. So here, we always love your questions. We always love that so you comment, that you give us your feedback, and that you also like, subscribe, and follow us on all our socials, on Instagram, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, everywhere. And tune in for next week's ChrisRodMaxShow. We are the AI podcast. Until next time.